Ladies and gentlemen, in life we often encounter situations that test our trust, our faith, and our understanding of the people around us. Betrayal, whether from a friend, family member, colleague, or even ourselves, is one of the most painful experiences we can endure. But what if I told you that God's signs are all around us, warning us of hidden betrayal long before it occurs? The key is learning to recognize these signs, understanding their meanings, and protecting ourselves from the harm they might bring. First, it's important to understand that betrayal isn't always overt. It doesn't always come with a loud announcement or a public display of wrongdoing. Most of the time it's subtle, hidden beneath layers of deception, silence, or manipulation. And it's during these moments when the world seems to be a perfect picture that we must rely on our faith and our ability to listen to God's subtle guidance. One of the first signs is the distortion of truth. Betrayal often begins with small lies, things that seem insignificant but in time erode trust. The Bible teaches us to speak the truth in love, and when someone's words consistently misalign with their actions, it's a warning sign. When the truth is twisted, God is asking us to pay attention. Another sign is unexplained distance. In relationships, communication and closeness are vital. If someone who was once close to you suddenly becomes distant or aloof without explanation, that gap may signal something deeper. God gives us the wisdom to sense when things are amiss, even when we can't immediately see the cause. Then there is the sign of jealousy and competition. True friends and allies do not envy each other, they support one another. When someone around you consistently competes with you, undermines your achievements, or feels threatened by your success, this jealousy could be a precursor to betrayal. God's guidance in such times urges us to guard our hearts. Another subtle sign is the manipulation of your emotions. Betrayers often use emotions to control and direct others. If someone is constantly making you feel guilty, anxious, or responsible for their happiness, it's an indication that their motives may not be pure. God teaches us to love and support one another, not to manipulate. Further, we should pay attention to the pattern of inconsistency. Those who betray you often wear masks. One moment they are your best friend, the next they act like strangers. This inconsistency can be jarring, but it's also a message to stay vigilant. God's sign is clear: stay alert to this behavior, as it often precedes something more harmful. Sometimes betrayal is preceded by silence in moments of need. When you're vulnerable and in need of support, the silence of those around you, especially those you trust, can be telling. God's signs in these moments may come in the form of an empty phone call or a lack of empathy when you're hurting. It's in these quiet moments that God calls us to examine our relationships and understand who is truly there for us. Inauthentic affection is also a sign of potential betrayal. Some people express false kindness or love to mask their intentions. When affection feels forced, disingenuous, or opportunistic, we should recognize the possibility of betrayal. God's warning may come through the discomfort we feel in such interactions. Lastly, betrayal can manifest when a person's actions don't align with their words. It's easy to be swayed by promises and sweet words, but actions are what reveal true character. God teaches us to trust in integrity and authenticity, and when actions contradict words, we should be cautious. These signs are God's way of protecting us, giving us the insight to see beyond the surface. But recognizing them is only part of the equation. We must also be prepared to take action. Protecting ourselves involves setting boundaries, walking away when necessary, and trusting in God's wisdom to guide us. As we navigate relationships and trust, may we learn to be discerning and wise in our decisions, always seeking God's guidance for protection from hidden betrayal. Distortion of truth is one of the most insidious signs of hidden betrayal. At its core, betrayal often starts with subtle alterations of reality, small lies, and half-truths that, when pieced together, form a pattern of deception. While it may seem like harmless misstatements at first, these distortions serve as the foundation for larger acts of dishonesty and disloyalty. Recognizing these signs early is essential in protecting oneself from the painful consequences of betrayal. The distortion of truth can manifest in many forms. It might be a simple, seemingly insignificant lie, an excuse that doesn't quite make sense, a small event that's been exaggerated, or an omission of important details that change the narrative. These early signs can be easily overlooked or dismissed, especially when the person telling the lies is someone we trust. However, if we pay close attention, these small discrepancies begin to stack up, creating a subtle but undeniable sense of unease. They form a web of deceit that can entangle us if we're not careful. A crucial aspect of truth distortion is the gradual shift in the story. A person might tell you one thing today and something completely different tomorrow. This inconsistency can be difficult to detect because it's often disguised as forgetfulness or minor confusion. At first, you may think that they simply got the details wrong, but over time you start to notice a pattern. Their version of events may change based on what benefits them at the moment, or they may manipulate facts to shift blame, avoid responsibility, or paint themselves in a better light. This is not just a failure to remember, it's an intentional effort to distort reality to suit their needs, often in ways that undermine your trust or make you question your own understanding of what's happening. In relationships, whether personal or professional, we place a high value on the truth. The bond between people is built upon trust, and once that trust is fractured by dishonesty, the foundation of the relationship begins to crumble. The person who engages in the distortion of truth might not immediately be acting out of malice sometimes. They may distort the truth to protect themselves from consequences or to avoid confrontation. But as this behavior continues, it evolves into something more dangerous: manipulation and control. The lies, no matter how small, begin to serve a more malicious purpose. They are no longer about protecting feelings or avoiding awkward situations. They are about covering up deeper intentions, hiding guilt, or deflecting blame. The key to recognizing distortion of truth is to be attuned to inconsistencies in emotional reactions. For example, if you catch someone in a lie and they become overly defensive, angry, or hostile when questioned, it's a clear sign that something more is going on. People who are honest are typically willing to explain or clarify misunderstandings. However, those who are hiding the truth often become agitated and resistant when confronted. This defensive behavior can be a powerful clue that the distortion of truth is intentional and that they are trying to protect themselves or avoid exposure. Another key indicator is the discrepancy between actions and words. Someone who frequently distorts the truth might tell you one thing but behave in a completely different manner. For instance, they may assure you of their loyalty and commitment, yet their actions suggest otherwise. They may claim to have your best interests at heart, but their actions tell a different story. They may promise support or help, only to pull away when you need them most. This inconsistency is a major red flag and signals that the person is not being truthful in their words or their behavior. It's important to remember that distortion of truth can be difficult to recognize because it often involves a gradual process. The lies tend to be small, almost insignificant at first. They might seem like nothing more than minor misunderstandings. But over time, these small distortions begin to accumulate, and the larger truth becomes harder to discern. It's easy to brush off a single incident of dishonesty as an isolated event, but when the same person repeatedly distorts the truth, it's time to take a step back and assess the situation more critically. As this pattern of deceit continues, it can lead to the breakdown of communication and connection. When a person consistently distorts the truth, it becomes difficult to have meaningful conversations or build any level of understanding. You may start to question their motivations, and your ability to trust them becomes compromised. This breakdown in trust often creates a rift that may be hard to repair, especially if the distortion of truth has gone on for an extended period. It's not just the lies themselves that are damaging, it's the erosion of the relationship that occurs as a result of the dishonesty. Recognizing the distortion of truth early is essential in protecting yourself from betrayal. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it can be incredibly difficult to rebuild. Paying attention to small inconsistencies, being aware of your emotional reactions, and noticing when actions don't align with words are all critical in identifying dishonesty before it leads to something deeper. The more you tune into these signs, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself from the damage that hidden betrayal can cause. It's important to trust your instincts and set boundaries to safeguard your heart and mind from the corrosive effects of deception. Unexplained distance in a relationship can be one of the most unsettling and confusing experiences. When someone you trust and care about begins to withdraw without any clear reason, it often signals something deeper at play. This distancing can happen gradually or suddenly, and the absence of explanation makes it all the more difficult to navigate. The silence, the withdrawal, and the lack of communication create a void that may leave you questioning what went wrong, especially when everything seemed fine just a short while ago. This type of emotional distance is often a subtle yet powerful sign of hidden betrayal, a betrayal that may not be apparent at first, but one that becomes more evident as the distance grows. One of the most painful aspects of unexplained distance is the feeling of abandonment. Relationships, whether familial, romantic, or platonic, are built on mutual interaction, shared experiences, and emotional connection. When someone you are close to begins to pull away without any explanation or warning, it can leave you feeling lost and helpless. The sudden coldness or the inability to connect can make you question whether you did something wrong, whether your presence is no longer valued, or whether the bond you thought you shared was never as strong as you believed. In such moments, your emotions can become a whirlwind of self-doubt, regret, and confusion. However, it's essential to recognize that this kind of withdrawal is rarely without reason, even if that reason is not immediately visible. Unexplained distance is often a sign that something has changed in the dynamic of the relationship, something unspoken, hidden, or even deliberately concealed. Sometimes the person pulling away might be avoiding confrontation or refusing to address issues that have arisen, either within themselves or within the relationship. The withdrawal can be an attempt to create space in order to avoid conflict, or it can be a defense mechanism to protect themselves from being vulnerable. But in cases of hidden betrayal, this distance is frequently a sign that the person's feelings have shifted in a way that they do not want to confront or acknowledge. When emotional distance grows, the lack of communication creates a sense of ambiguity, leaving you in the dark about the other person's true intentions. Often, this lack of openness can be accompanied by confusing behavior, such as a person still maintaining minimal contact but avoiding deeper conversations, or engaging in superficial exchanges that lack emotional depth. They may still be physically present, yet emotionally absent. This disconnection can lead to a slow erosion of trust, because you start to question whether the person you thought you knew is truly the same person. Their silence speaks volumes, and each moment they withdraw without explanation amplifies the unease in your heart. One of the challenges in dealing with unexplained distance is that, in many cases, the person who is pulling away may not offer any clear indication as to why. They might not be forthcoming with their reasons, and they may even dismiss your concerns when you attempt to discuss the growing distance. If you ask why they seem distant or if something is wrong, you may receive vague answers, such as "I'm just going through a lot right now," or "I'm not sure." These responses only add to the frustration, leaving you with more questions than answers. The lack of clarity in these situations often stems from the fact that the real reason for the distance, the hidden betrayal, is not something they are ready to confront or reveal. Instead of being honest and open, they may choose to distance themselves to avoid facing uncomfortable truths or to protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. It's also worth considering the potential of guilt as a driving factor behind unexplained distance. When someone is involved in betrayal, whether it's infidelity, dishonesty, or betrayal of trust, the weight of their actions often causes internal conflict. Instead of facing the reality of what they've done, they may pull away, distancing themselves from the situation and the person they have wronged. Their avoidance may be a coping mechanism, a way to evade the guilt they feel. The growing emotional distance may reflect their inability to face their own conscience or the fear of being exposed. Rather than admitting their wrongdoing, they retreat and hide behind the silence, allowing the relationship to suffer in the process. In situations of hidden betrayal, the emotional withdrawal can be incredibly painful for the person on the receiving end. It creates a profound sense of isolation and confusion, especially when you are unsure why the other person is acting this way. It can lead you to overanalyze every interaction, searching for clues and signs that might explain the change. You may even begin to question your own worth, doubting whether the person pulling away truly cares about you, or if their affection for you is ever genuine. The longer the emotional distance remains unaddressed, the more difficult it becomes to restore any sense of connection or understanding. In some cases, this unexplained distance can be a precursor to an even deeper betrayal. If the person is avoiding you, it could be because they are no longer invested in the relationship, or they are hiding something significant from you. They may be emotionally preparing themselves to cut ties, and the distance is a way for them to create a buffer before making a definitive break. This can be particularly damaging if you are unaware of the impending betrayal, as the silence and avoidance leave you in a state of limbo, unsure of where you stand. Moreover, avoiding confrontation is another factor that often fuels unexplained distance. Some individuals are uncomfortable with confrontation and would rather retreat than face difficult conversations. When they are guilty of betrayal, the thought of having to explain their actions, apologize, or come to terms with the hurt they have caused becomes unbearable. Therefore, instead of being honest and transparent, they choose to withdraw, distancing themselves both physically and emotionally. The withdrawal of someone close to you can feel like an emotional death in the relationship, as the connection that once existed begins to fade. The more you try to reach out, the more distant they become, creating a painful disconnect. The silence speaks louder than words, and often it's a silence that is full of unspoken truths. Recognizing the signs of unexplained distance is crucial to understanding whether there is more beneath the surface, whether the relationship is still worth salvaging, or whether it's time to protect yourself from further harm. If the person is unwilling to open up, and their withdrawal seems intentional, it may be God's sign to guard your heart and reassess the dynamic, protecting yourself from the eventual heartbreak that could come with the revelation of betrayal. Jealousy and competition are emotions that often arise in relationships, but when they become persistent, subtle signs of hidden betrayal start to emerge. These feelings are not always overtly expressed, but rather manifest in more covert ways like passive-aggressive behavior, undermining comments, or sabotaging efforts. While a little healthy competition can sometimes motivate us and push us to be better, when jealousy and competition are involved, the dynamics of a relationship shift from mutual support to one of rivalry, discord, and even betrayal. Recognizing this transformation early on is crucial to understanding the underlying motives of those around you and protecting yourself from potential harm. Jealousy is a powerful emotion, one that often reveals deeper insecurities or fears. In relationships, it can arise when one person feels threatened by another's success, attention, or affection. At its core, jealousy stems from the fear of losing something, whether that is status, recognition, love, or respect. In some cases, jealousy may be rooted in personal insecurities or a lack of self-confidence, causing individuals to compare themselves to others and feel inferior. However, when jealousy becomes excessive or unchecked, it can lead to actions that harm the relationship and those involved. In friendships or romantic relationships, jealousy can be destructive when one person becomes envious of the other's achievements or relationships. A friend or partner who once celebrated your successes may start to downplay your achievements or act distant when you experience a triumph. This shift is often subtle, manifesting in passive-aggressive remarks like, "Oh, it must be nice to have it so easy," or "I wish I had that kind of luck." These seemingly innocent comments are often masking feelings of resentment or bitterness. Instead of offering genuine congratulations or support, the jealous person feels threatened and is unable to celebrate your success without feeling diminished themselves. In the workplace, jealousy can also play a destructive role, particularly when someone begins to compete with you for recognition, resources, or positions of power. A colleague who once seemed supportive might start undermining your work or claiming credit for your ideas. They may attempt to discredit you in front of others, either by belittling your contributions or creating a false narrative about your abilities. This competitive behavior can escalate as the jealous individual seeks to outshine you, even if it means sacrificing your reputation or achievements in the process. While they may appear friendly or cooperative on the surface, their jealousy is driving their actions, and it can lead to emotional harm or professional setbacks for you. What is especially dangerous about jealousy in relationships is that it can often be disguised as concern or care. For instance, a jealous person may act as if they are simply trying to protect you from disappointment or failure, masking their true feelings of envy. They might say things like, "I'm just worried you're getting ahead of yourself," or "Don't get your hopes up." Things don't always work out. This type of behavior is a classic example of using the guise of caution to conceal resentment. The truth is that these words aren't meant to guide or support. They are often meant to undermine your confidence and keep you from reaching your full potential. When jealousy enters the picture, it's no longer about genuine concern for your well-being, but rather about keeping you in a position where the jealous individual feels more secure. When jealousy is combined with a sense of competition, it creates an even more toxic dynamic. In relationships, healthy competition can encourage growth, motivate each other to achieve personal goals, and foster a sense of mutual respect. However, when competition turns into rivalry, it undermines the very foundation of the relationship. Instead of seeing each other as partners who can grow together, you begin to see each other as threats to be outdone or surpassed. This unhealthy competition creates a divide, with each person striving to one-up the other rather than collaborating for mutual benefit. When this happens, jealousy often takes root as one person's success becomes a source of frustration and bitterness for the other. The relationship, once built on trust and shared goals, becomes one of animosity and secrecy. In romantic relationships, jealousy can manifest as controlling behavior, where one partner feels entitled to monitor the other's actions, friendships, or interactions with others. This possessiveness often arises from insecurities or a desire to maintain control, but it can feel suffocating and lead to emotional distance. A partner who once trusted you may begin to question your every move, ask about your whereabouts, or even accuse you of disloyalty without cause. These accusations, based on unfounded jealousy, not only create tension but also set the stage for deeper emotional betrayal. When one person constantly feels the need to compete for attention, affection, or validation, it becomes more about manipulation and control than about love or support. What makes jealousy and competition particularly dangerous is that they can gradually erode the emotional bonds that tie people together. Over time, the jealous individual may begin to sabotage the relationship out of frustration or resentment, without realizing the damage they are doing. They may become more secretive, engaging in underhanded tactics to try to regain a sense of superiority. This could include spreading rumors, isolating you from others, or even creating doubts in your mind about your own worth. The goal is not always to destroy the relationship outright, but rather to maintain a position of control or dominance. As the competition intensifies, so does the betrayal. Eventually, it becomes clear that the relationship has shifted from one of mutual respect to one of emotional manipulation. Recognizing jealousy and competition as signs of hidden betrayal requires careful attention to subtle changes in behavior. You may notice that someone who once celebrated your victories now feels threatened by them. You may see small signs of sabotage, like the undermining of your accomplishments or the subtle erosion of your self-confidence. You may begin to feel isolated as the jealous individual works to push you away from your circle of support. The key is to trust your instincts and observe whether the behavior is driven by genuine concern and encouragement or by a desire to control, belittle, or undermine you. Jealousy and competition, when unchecked, can create an environment in which trust is replaced by suspicion and support is replaced by rivalry. These emotions, while often seen as normal in small doses, can become the foundation for a deep betrayal. When someone allows jealousy to cloud their judgment and turns a healthy relationship into one of competition, they open the door to emotional harm and manipulation. Protecting yourself from such betrayal involves recognizing these patterns early, understanding their roots, and making conscious efforts to distance yourself from toxic dynamics that serve only to drain your emotional well-being. Avoiding or deflecting responsibility is a powerful tactic often employed by individuals involved in hidden betrayal. This behavior becomes a subtle yet dangerous sign of someone who may not have the courage or integrity to confront the truth of their actions or the consequences of their behavior. When someone continually refuses to accept responsibility, it's typically a sign that they are attempting to protect themselves from the repercussions of their dishonesty, manipulation, or betrayal. This deflection can take many forms, from shifting blame onto others to creating elaborate excuses for their actions, and it can cause significant damage to relationships if not recognized and addressed early on. One of the most common forms of deflecting responsibility is blame shifting. The person who is involved in betrayal might refuse to acknowledge their own role in the conflict or problem and instead redirect the blame onto someone else. In many cases, this is done subtly, through the use of excuses or by manipulating the narrative to make themselves appear as the victim. For example, if an individual is caught in a lie or breach of trust, they might claim that it's someone else's fault for misunderstanding them, or they may accuse you of overreacting to a situation that was, in their view, harmless. This tactic allows them to avoid facing their own actions and the harm they may have caused. Instead of offering an apology or taking responsibility, they create a version of events where they are not at fault. This form of deflection can be particularly damaging in close relationships, where trust and accountability are key to maintaining a strong bond. When someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions, it can leave the other person feeling powerless, frustrated, and disillusioned. Not only does it hinder the healing process, but it also creates an unhealthy dynamic where one person is left to shoulder the emotional burden of the situation. The individual who is deflecting responsibility may even go so far as to make the other person feel guilty or at fault, turning the tables in a way that makes it difficult to even have an honest conversation about what has happened. Another way people avoid responsibility is through the use of excuses. They may not outright deny their actions, but instead attempt to justify them by offering a series of reasons that minimize the impact of their behavior. These excuses are often framed in a way that tries to make their betrayal seem understandable or even justifiable. For example, someone might explain their dishonesty by saying, "I only lied because I didn't want to hurt your feelings or I was under a lot of stress, so I didn't think clearly." While there may be some truth to the fact that stress or emotional pressure can affect decision-making, this does not absolve the individual from the responsibility of their actions. Excuses in this context are simply a way to avoid facing the reality of their betrayal and its consequences. The use of excuses can also create a cycle of denial, where the person refuses to acknowledge the full extent of their wrongdoing. By continually justifying their behavior, they avoid having to take a hard look at their actions and their impact on others. They may even convince themselves that what they did wasn't really that bad, which allows them to avoid feeling any guilt or remorse. This denial can be especially harmful in a relationship, as it prevents the individual from growing, learning from their mistakes, and taking steps to repair the damage they've caused. It creates an environment where accountability is absent, and the betrayal becomes less likely to be addressed or resolved. In some cases, individuals who deflect responsibility may also engage in victim-playing a tactic where they portray themselves as the injured party in the situation. Instead of acknowledging their role in the betrayal, they shift the focus onto their own pain or hardship. For instance, they may say things like, "You don't understand how hard I've had it," or "You don't realize how much I've been suffering." This tactic shifts the attention away from their betrayal and onto their personal struggles, which may cause the other person to feel guilty for confronting them or questioning their actions. By framing themselves as the victim, they manipulate the situation to avoid accountability and put the other person in a position where they feel they must offer sympathy or support. This behavior is particularly manipulative because it taps into the empathy and concern of others. When someone is constantly deflecting responsibility and positioning themselves as a victim, it becomes increasingly difficult to see the situation clearly. The person on the receiving end of the betrayal may start to feel responsible for the other person's emotions and well-being, even though they are the one who has been wronged. This can create a toxic environment where the betrayed person feels they are in the wrong for standing up for themselves, allowing the individual who is deflecting responsibility to escape accountability for their actions. Gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation, is another powerful technique used to avoid responsibility. In this case, the person who has betrayed you may attempt to make you doubt your own perception of events, making you question what you know to be true. They may tell you that you're remembering things incorrectly, that you're overreacting, or that you're imagining things that never happened. Gaslighting creates confusion and self-doubt, leaving the victim unsure of what is real and what is not. The person who is deflecting responsibility using this method can cause the betrayed individual to second-guess their own experiences, making it even harder for them to address the issue head-on or seek resolution. Gaslighting is particularly dangerous because it undermines the victim's sense of reality and self-confidence. The person who is betraying them creates an alternate version of events where they are not responsible, and the victim's feelings are invalidated. Over time, the victim may begin to feel like they are the one at fault, even if they were the one who was wronged in the first place. This type of manipulation can have long-lasting psychological effects, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and even depression. In all of these cases, the refusal to accept responsibility is a sign that the person involved in the betrayal is not willing to face the consequences of their actions. Instead of being accountable for what they have done, they create a web of lies, excuses, and deflections to avoid the uncomfortable truth. This type of behavior can erode trust and make it difficult for the relationship to heal. It can also cause the person who has been betrayed to feel isolated, unsupported, and powerless as they are left to carry the emotional weight of the situation on their own. Recognizing this behavior is key to protecting yourself from further harm. By understanding the tactics used to deflect responsibility, you can take steps to protect your emotional well-being and set boundaries that will help you navigate the betrayal with strength and clarity. In relationships, whether personal or professional, betrayal often doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual erosion that can begin with small signs of dishonesty, secrecy, or even small acts of cruelty. One of the most significant indicators of hidden betrayal is the creation of false narratives, where someone deliberately distorts the truth to serve their own interests, manipulate others, or cover up their wrongdoing. This behavior is not only a sign of betrayal, but also a tool that the betrayer uses to maintain control over the narrative, avoiding responsibility for their actions while simultaneously manipulating the emotions and perceptions of others. False narratives often begin with misrepresentation, the intentional alteration of facts, details, or events to paint a different picture. In many cases, the person who is betraying you might twist the truth in such a way that you begin to question your own understanding of the situation. For instance, if a partner in a romantic relationship is unfaithful, they may begin to craft a story about why they engaged in the affair. They might say that they were feeling neglected, or that the relationship had become too predictable, shifting the focus away from their own choices and placing the blame on circumstances or on the other person's behavior. In doing so, they not only avoid responsibility for their actions, but also manipulate the other person into believing they were the ones who caused the betrayal. This type of false narrative serves as a defense mechanism, protecting the betrayer from guilt and allowing them to maintain a sense of innocence. In the workplace, false narratives are often used to create a more favorable image of the individual involved in the betrayal. A colleague might spread rumors about another person to deflect attention away from their own misconduct or to justify their actions. If they have sabotaged a project or stolen credit for someone else's work, they might tell their superiors or peers that the other person was underperforming or that the ideas were always their own. This distortion of reality is designed to shift blame, create confusion, and ensure that the betrayer is not held accountable for their actions. False narratives in professional settings can cause severe damage to reputations, careers, and morale, especially when the lies are believed and the victim's version of events is disregarded. One of the dangers of false narratives is that they are not always immediately obvious. They can be woven into conversations, casual remarks, or shared stories in such a subtle way that they become accepted as truth. Often the person telling the false story presents it in a manner that appears convincing, making it difficult for others to discern fact from fiction. They may offer fabricated explanations or embellish their version of events to make it seem more plausible or to evoke sympathy. For instance, someone involved in a betrayal might tell a mutual friend that they were forced into a situation or that they were simply reacting to circumstances, painting themselves as a victim rather than someone who willingly engaged in deceit or betrayal. These false narratives can take a deep psychological toll on the person being betrayed. The victim, upon hearing these distorted versions of events, may begin to question their own memory, judgment, and even their own worth. They may doubt whether they truly understood the situation, whether they misinterpreted things, or whether they are simply overreacting. This self-doubt can be debilitating, especially when the false narrative is consistently repeated or supported by others who might not be privy to the full truth. The more the narrative is reinforced, the harder it becomes to discern the reality of the situation. Another layer to the creation of false narratives is the element of gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the betrayer not only creates false stories but actively works to make the other person question their perception of reality. For example, when confronted about an action or behavior, the betrayer might respond by saying, "You're just being paranoid," or "That never happened." You're imagining things. They may accuse the victim of making things up, convincing them that their recollection of events is faulty. In doing so, they distort the victim's reality to the point where they begin to doubt their own sanity. This technique is often used by manipulators to avoid facing the consequences of their actions, while simultaneously exerting control over the victim's emotions and thoughts. The more the false narrative is built up, the more the victim becomes isolated from the truth. Over time, the betrayer's story becomes the dominant one, and the victim might feel like an outsider in their own life, unsure of whom to trust or what to believe. This isolation is particularly damaging because it undermines the victim's sense of self and their ability to protect themselves from further betrayal. The victim becomes so enmeshed in the false narrative that they may lose sight of their own boundaries, emotional needs, and personal integrity, allowing the betrayal to continue unchecked. Denying or minimizing the betrayal is another form of creating a false narrative. A betrayer might acknowledge a certain level of wrongdoing but downplay its significance, making it seem less harmful than it actually is. For example, if someone betrays their partner's trust by being dishonest about something important, they may admit to misleading them but minimize it by saying, "It wasn't a big deal, it's not like I did anything really wrong." In doing so, they attempt to minimize the emotional impact of their actions, making the victim feel as though they are overreacting. This tactic is often employed when the betrayer wants to maintain a sense of control and avoid facing the true consequences of their behavior. Another aspect of false narratives is the projection of their own flaws or mistakes onto others. Instead of confronting their own betrayal, the betrayer might accuse the victim of being untrustworthy or of having done something wrong. They may accuse the other person of overstepping boundaries, exaggerating the situation, or even betraying their trust. This strategy is meant to create confusion and deflect attention from the real issue, making the victim feel guilty or responsible for the betrayal. This type of deflection can be particularly insidious because it not only distorts the truth, but also shifts the burden of responsibility onto the victim. Creating false narratives is a way for someone to escape responsibility, avoid confronting the consequences of their actions, and manipulate the emotional environment around them. The betrayal is often hidden behind layers of lies, half-truths, and distortions, which makes it difficult to uncover the real story. The impact on the person being betrayed is profound, as they are forced to navigate a web of lies and manipulation, unsure of who to trust or what to believe. Recognizing the signs of false narratives and understanding their harmful effects can help individuals protect themselves from further emotional damage and take steps toward reclaiming the truth of their own experience. Emotional manipulation is one of the most insidious forms of hidden betrayal. It involves subtly influencing or controlling another person's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors for selfish gain or to maintain a position of power. This form of manipulation is particularly damaging because it often goes unnoticed until the victim is already emotionally drained and confused. It relies on exploiting vulnerabilities and using psychological tactics to undermine the victim's sense of self-worth and agency. The manipulator often disguises their actions as concern, care, or love, making it difficult for the victim to see the betrayal until it has already taken a deep toll. One of the most common forms of emotional manipulation is guilt tripping. A manipulative person may use guilt as a tool to control their victim's actions or decisions. They may do this by making the victim feel responsible for the manipulator's emotions or for the success of a particular situation, even when it is not their fault. For example, in a romantic relationship, a partner who is emotionally manipulative might say things like, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me," or "I've done so much for you, and you can't even do this one thing for me." By using guilt in this way, the manipulator forces the victim to act out of obligation or fear of letting the other person down, rather than out of genuine desire to help or contribute. Over time, the victim begins to feel as though they are constantly falling short, even when they are doing their best. The manipulator creates a cycle of guilt and self-doubt, which makes it harder for the victim to say no, set boundaries, or advocate for themselves. Another tactic used in emotional manipulation is playing on insecurities. The manipulator may take advantage of a person's vulnerabilities or weaknesses to gain control over them. This could involve making hurtful comments or subtly undermining the victim's confidence in their own abilities, appearance, or worth. A manipulative partner might tell their significant other, "You're lucky I'm with you. No one else would want you." Or "You're too sensitive, you shouldn't feel that way." These kinds of statements are designed to chip away at the victim's self-esteem and make them question their own worth. The manipulator may even suggest that they are the only one who truly cares about the victim or understands them, creating a false sense of dependency. The victim becomes reliant on the manipulator for validation and approval, and the manipulator uses this dependence to maintain control. Isolation is another powerful manipulation tactic used by those who are betraying others emotionally. The manipulator may work to isolate the victim from friends, family, or other support systems in order to increase their control over them. The manipulator may begin to suggest that the victim's loved ones are not trustworthy, or that they do not understand the victim as well as the manipulator does. In extreme cases, the manipulator may even go so far as to encourage the victim to sever ties with people who are critical of the manipulator, or who challenge the manipulator's behavior. For example, an emotionally manipulative partner might say, "I don't like how your friends talk about us." Or, "You spend too much time with your family and they don't care about our relationship." By isolating the victim, the manipulator ensures that they have fewer people to turn to for support or perspective, making the victim more dependent on the manipulator for emotional validation and guidance. Victim playing is yet another form of emotional manipulation. A manipulator may present themselves as the victim, even when they are the ones causing harm. This tactic makes it difficult for the victim to confront the manipulator or to express their feelings without feeling guilty. The manipulator might say things like, "You always treat me this way," or "I can't believe you do this to me after everything I've done for you." In this case, the manipulator turns the tables and shifts the blame, creating an environment in which the victim feels responsible for the manipulator's emotional well-being. The victim is left feeling as though they are constantly in the wrong, even though the manipulator is the one causing harm. This tactic is especially harmful because it prevents the victim from being able to fully express their own emotions or assert their boundaries, as they are constantly trying to prevent the manipulator from feeling hurt or upset. Another form of emotional manipulation is withholding affection or attention. A manipulator may withhold love, attention, or intimacy in order to punish or control the victim. This form of manipulation can be particularly painful because it targets the victim's need for love and connection. For example, a partner might refuse to speak to the victim, ignore their needs, or withdraw emotionally when they are upset with the victim. The manipulator may say things like, "I'll talk to you when you start acting the way I want," or "You don't deserve my love right now." This tactic forces the victim to constantly seek the manipulator's approval in order to receive affection, and it reinforces the manipulator's control over the victim's emotional state. Withholding affection is a way to maintain power and dominance in the relationship, ensuring that the victim remains dependent on the manipulator's approval. Finally, exaggerating or distorting the victim's behavior is another form of emotional manipulation. The manipulator may twist the victim's words, actions, or intentions to make them seem unreasonable or irrational. This creates a scenario where the victim feels as though they are always walking on eggshells or that their actions are always misunderstood. The manipulator might accuse the victim of overreacting, or they might suggest that the victim is being unreasonable for expressing their feelings. This tactic serves to discredit the victim's emotional responses and make them feel as though they are in the wrong for having any concerns. Over time, this can lead the victim to suppress their own emotions and avoid confronting the manipulator's harmful behavior, allowing the manipulation to continue unchecked. Emotional manipulation is a form of hidden betrayal because it operates on a subconscious level, making it difficult for the victim to recognize the manipulation until it has deeply affected their emotional and mental well-being. By using guilt, gaslighting, isolation, and other tactics, the manipulator maintains control and power over the victim while hiding behind a facade of care or concern. Recognizing the signs of emotional manipulation is essential in protecting oneself from such betrayal. It requires being attuned to one's own feelings, boundaries, and emotional needs and refusing to accept behavior that diminishes or invalidates those needs. When betrayal occurs, it often manifests through subtle and manipulative actions that aim to destroy trust without leaving obvious traces. One of the most dangerous signs of hidden betrayal is the consistent presence of emotional withdrawal. This form of detachment doesn't just involve physical distance, but is primarily characterized by a person shutting down emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. They withdraw from meaningful interactions, offering minimal engagement in conversations, and creating an atmosphere of isolation and alienation. This withdrawal is a tactic used by the betrayer to distance themselves from the other person, avoiding emotional accountability while simultaneously maintaining an element of control over the relationship. Emotional withdrawal is particularly insidious because it is often presented as a form of self-protection or as a response to external stressors, such as work pressures or personal difficulties. The betrayer may claim that they are too tired, stressed, or distracted to be emotionally present, thereby shifting the focus away from the real reason for their distance. Over time, the person on the receiving end begins to internalize these excuses, feeling as though they are the cause of the emotional disconnection. They may wonder if they have done something wrong, questioning their own behavior, and feeling rejected and unworthy. The emotional withdrawal often leaves the victim feeling helpless and unsure of how to re-establish the connection, which only deepens the sense of betrayal. One of the hallmarks of emotional withdrawal and betrayal is the lack of communication. A person who is emotionally withdrawing may become increasingly elusive, offering vague responses, avoiding deep conversations, and providing minimal emotional feedback. This behavior leaves the victim grasping for answers, unsure of where they stand in the relationship or what has caused the sudden emotional gap. It is important to recognize that emotional withdrawal is not merely a response to temporary stress or fatigue. It is a conscious act of disengagement that allows the betrayer to evade emotional intimacy and responsibility. In relationships, especially romantic ones, emotional connection is vital. When it is deliberately withheld, it erodes the foundation of trust and understanding that holds the bond together. Another way emotional withdrawal can manifest is through increased indifference. The person who is withdrawing may become disengaged and unresponsive to the other person's emotional needs, desires, or concerns. They may show little interest in what the victim is going through, failing to offer support or empathy. This indifference is often a tactic to distance oneself from the emotional complexities of the situation and avoid confronting the issues at hand. The victim may feel as though they are constantly giving, nurturing, or expressing their own emotions without receiving any validation or care in return. Over time, this lack of emotional reciprocity can create feelings of inadequacy and frustration, as the victim starts to feel invisible or unimportant in the eyes of the betrayer. This emotional neglect is a direct form of betrayal because it signals a breakdown in mutual respect and care, which are essential components of any healthy relationship. Furthermore, emotional withdrawal can take on a more manipulative form when it is coupled with silent treatment. This tactic is often used to punish the victim for confronting the betrayer or expressing dissatisfaction with the relationship. The silent treatment is not just a momentary lapse in communication, but an intentional, prolonged withdrawal of attention, affection, and acknowledgement. It is designed to make the victim feel unworthy of the betrayer's presence, love, or recognition. The silent treatment often creates a power imbalance where the person who is withdrawing holds control over the situation, leaving the victim feeling at their mercy. The manipulator may use this tactic to create emotional distress in the victim, knowing that their silence will trigger feelings of anxiety, insecurity, and loneliness. The victim may feel as though they are walking on eggshells, trying to appease the betrayer and regain their attention, while the betrayer maintains control through silence. Emotional withdrawal can also manifest through avoiding conflict. When betrayal occurs, the betrayer may avoid addressing the issue directly, instead opting for silence or diversion. They may refuse to acknowledge the betrayal, either because they are trying to avoid the emotional fallout or because they want to evade responsibility. This avoidance tactic prevents any meaningful resolution from taking place, leaving the victim in a state of confusion and emotional turmoil. The victim may feel as though their concerns are being dismissed or ignored, which only intensifies the sense of betrayal. Instead of confronting the betrayal, the manipulator seeks to keep the peace by avoiding uncomfortable conversations, leaving the other person in limbo. This avoidance strategy can go on for an extended period, with the victim unsure of whether the betrayer will ever come clean, apologize, or even acknowledge the harm that has been done. In the meantime, emotional distance continues to grow, creating a widening gap in the relationship. Sometimes the emotional withdrawal is masked as self-care. The betrayer may claim that they need space to focus on themselves, that they are undergoing personal growth or dealing with inner struggles. While self-care is important, using it as a shield to avoid facing the consequences of betrayal is manipulative. The betrayer may hide behind the guise of self-improvement, claiming that they cannot invest in the relationship until they work on themselves. This approach can be especially harmful because it invalidates the victim's feelings of hurt and abandonment. The person being betrayed may feel that they are being asked to sacrifice their own emotional needs for the sake of the betrayer's journey, leaving them feeling unsupported and unheard. The key issue with emotional withdrawal is that it creates emotional abandonment, a form of betrayal that often leads the victim to feel as though they no longer matter to the betrayer. It becomes an emotional form of neglect, where the betrayer's actions or lack thereof send the message that the victim's needs and feelings are not important. This abandonment is particularly painful because it is a subtle form of rejection. Unlike more overt forms of betrayal, such as infidelity or lying, emotional withdrawal occurs in a way that can be hard to pinpoint. The victim may struggle to understand whether the detachment is temporary, if it is their fault, or if the relationship is simply deteriorating. This confusion, combined with a lack of closure, can create prolonged emotional suffering. Another key aspect of emotional withdrawal is that it often goes unnoticed by others. Those outside the relationship may not see the subtle but profound changes that occur when emotional withdrawal takes place. The victim may appear to be in a seemingly normal relationship, but internally they are dealing with emotional isolation and distress. Because the betrayer withdraws in such a way that it is not obvious to others, the victim is left feeling isolated in their pain. The absence of outward signs of trouble can leave the victim questioning their own feelings, wondering if they are imagining the emotional distance or if they are just overly sensitive. In many cases, emotional withdrawal is a deliberate tactic used to avoid emotional intimacy and shield oneself from the vulnerability that comes with truly engaging in a relationship. The betrayer may fear confronting the pain they have caused or may be unwilling to deal with the complexities of repairing trust. By withdrawing emotionally, they ensure that they are not forced to confront their actions or their role in the betrayal. They maintain control over their emotions and avoid being held accountable for their behavior. Emotional withdrawal is a powerful form of betrayal because it undermines the core of any relationship: trust, communication, and connection. When a person withdraws emotionally, they deny the other individual the support, understanding, and validation they need. Over time, this detachment can erode the sense of security and safety that was once present in the relationship, leaving the victim feeling abandoned, unloved, and disconnected. Recognizing emotional withdrawal is crucial in protecting oneself from further emotional harm and ensuring that boundaries are set to prevent further betrayal. One of the most heartbreaking and covert forms of hidden betrayal is the consistent breaking of promises. At the heart of every relationship, whether personal, familial, or professional, lies a foundation built on trust. This trust is nurtured by words and actions that align, creating an environment where individuals can rely on each other for support, care, and mutual understanding. A promise is an assurance that reinforces this trust, offering a sense of security and reliability. However, when promises are consistently broken, it slowly erodes the foundation of the relationship and betrays the trust that was established. What makes this form of betrayal particularly dangerous is that it often happens incrementally, leaving the victim feeling disillusioned, but unsure of when the betrayal actually began. Breaking promises is a deliberate act that undermines the victim's expectations and creates emotional turmoil. The first time a promise is broken, the impact may seem minor, perhaps a minor delay or a small deviation from an agreement. However, as time passes, the frequency of broken promises increases, and the emotional toll becomes more pronounced. Each broken promise adds another layer of disappointment, leading the victim to question the sincerity and reliability of the person making these promises. What was once a simple promise now feels like a breach of the bond that was supposed to provide security and support. The victim begins to feel that their trust and expectations are unimportant to the other person, who seems willing to break their word without remorse or consideration. For example, in a romantic relationship, one partner may repeatedly promise to spend quality time together, only to cancel plans at the last minute due to work, personal issues, or other distractions. Initially, these excuses might be accepted with understanding and forgiveness, as they seem justifiable. But as time goes on, the cancellations become more frequent, and the partner's promises lose their weight. The person who has been let down time and time again starts to feel invisible and unworthy of the promised attention. This can create an emotional disconnect, where one person feels neglected or unimportant, and the other remains indifferent to the harm being caused. Each time a promise is broken, the person begins to internalize feelings of rejection, doubting the sincerity of the relationship and their place within it. In a professional context, broken promises can have even more severe consequences. A manager who frequently promises to advocate for their team members but never follows through can create an atmosphere of frustration and disillusionment. Employees who were once motivated by the belief that their hard work would be recognized and rewarded are left feeling demoralized and undervalued. The lack of follow-through on promises can lead to a toxic work environment, where individuals no longer trust their leaders or colleagues and productivity suffers. The erosion of trust in a workplace can result in decreased morale, increased turnover, and a lack of collaboration. Employees may begin to feel that their efforts are futile, as the promises made to them become empty words with no meaning or impact. In familial relationships, broken promises can also have a deep emotional impact. Parents who promise their children certain things, be it spending time together, attending an important event, or providing support, only to break those promises, create feelings of abandonment and insecurity. Children, in particular, rely on the stability and consistency provided by their parents. When promises are broken, it sends a message that their needs and desires are not important. As children grow, they may begin to question their worth, feeling that they cannot depend on those who should be their most reliable source of support. This can shape their future relationships, making it difficult for them to trust others or to fully invest emotionally in connections. Breaking promises can also be an emotional manipulation tactic, especially when it is used as a power play. A person who consistently breaks their promises may be using this behavior to assert dominance over the other person. By failing to deliver on promises, they are subtly asserting that their own needs and desires take precedence over the victim's. This tactic can be especially harmful in romantic relationships, where the person breaking promises may do so intentionally to maintain control. For instance, by continually making promises they have no intention of keeping, the manipulator ensures that the other person remains in a state of uncertainty and anticipation, always hoping for a change that never comes. This dynamic fosters a sense of emotional dependency, where the victim is constantly waiting for the promises to be fulfilled, only to be repeatedly disappointed. In this way, broken promises become a tool of control, keeping the victim emotionally invested in a relationship that offers little in return. The pattern of breaking promises can also involve gaslighting, where the individual who breaks their promises tries to make the victim feel as though they are unreasonable for being upset or disappointed. The person may say things like, "I never promised that," or "You're overreacting," in an attempt to invalidate the victim's feelings. This form of manipulation works by shifting the blame onto the person who has been let down, making them question their own memory or perception of the situation. Gaslighting, in this context, serves to minimize the significance of the broken promise, making the victim feel guilty or overly sensitive for wanting the promise to be fulfilled. Over time, the victim may begin to doubt their own expectations, accepting the broken promises as inevitable and their feelings as inconsequential. In some cases, individuals who repeatedly break promises may not even realize the extent of the harm they are causing. They may view promises as something they can make in the moment, without fully considering the impact of their words on others. They may have good intentions when they make the promises but fail to follow through due to a lack of self-discipline, a tendency to overcommit, or simply an inability to prioritize others' needs. However, this lack of consideration still constitutes betrayal, as it shows a disregard for the trust that the victim has placed in them. The broken promise, whether intentional or accidental, creates a cycle of disappointment, causing the victim to lose faith in the person and the relationship as a whole. The emotional toll of broken promises can be far-reaching, affecting not only the immediate relationship but also the victim's broader sense of self-worth and trust in others. Each broken promise chips away at the victim's ability to believe in the sincerity of future promises, whether made by the same individual or others. Over time, the victim may begin to anticipate disappointment rather than hope when they hear promises made to them. They may start to internalize feelings of inadequacy, believing that they are unworthy of being treated with respect and integrity. This can lead to a loss of confidence in their ability to trust others or to build healthy, fulfilling relationships. Recognizing the signs of broken promises and understanding their impact is essential in protecting oneself from further betrayal. In relationships, promises are a reflection of the commitment and mutual respect between individuals. When promises are consistently broken, it becomes clear that trust is being undermined, and the relationship is no longer built on a foundation of integrity. The victim must take steps to acknowledge the emotional harm caused by these broken promises and set boundaries that protect their emotional well-being. By doing so, they can begin to reclaim their sense of self-worth and protect themselves from further emotional betrayal. In conclusion, God's signs of hidden betrayal are not always obvious, but they manifest in subtle, often damaging ways that can erode trust, distort relationships, and cause emotional harm. Whether it is through deceit, emotional manipulation, broken promises, or the gradual withdrawal of affection and support, betrayal corrodes the very foundation of our connections with others. These signs, while often disguised under the surface of everyday interactions, can have long-lasting effects on an individual's emotional well-being and sense of self-worth. Recognizing these hidden signs is crucial, for only when we become aware of them can we take steps to protect ourselves from further harm. It is through understanding the various forms of betrayal, emotional, verbal, and physical, that we can better shield ourselves from the damaging consequences of toxic relationships. But it is equally important to note that protecting oneself is not about building walls that prevent connection, but about setting healthy boundaries that promote respect, trust, and integrity. By learning to recognize these signs and listening to our instincts, we can make conscious decisions to distance ourselves from those who betray us, while fostering relationships that nurture mutual respect, care, and love. At the core of God's teachings is the emphasis on trust, love, and truth. We are called to be vigilant in our interactions with others and to seek relationships that uplift and support us. While betrayal may occur, it is ultimately a test of our resilience and our capacity to move forward with wisdom, grace, and self-protection. As we navigate life's complexities, let us remember to value ourselves, honor our boundaries, and always seek relationships that reflect the truth and love that God desires for us.